Chapter 9, Remember Me. This is pages 126 through 130. The scientists and historians who have studied the human remains found throughout the colonial Chesapeake area have learned a great deal about these individuals. From their diet and health to their social status, many secrets once lost to time have become part of our recorded history again. One thing that no one could determine in a laboratory or an archive, however, was what the colonists had looked like when they were alive. Very few were drawn or painted in their lifetimes. Written descriptions of any but the most famous are rare. Forensic artists focus on solving the puzzle of appearance. Working with forensic anthropologists, these skilled specialists use skull analyses to create lifelike images of the dead. The key to this endeavor is the fact that many facial structures of a living person are determined by bone features of that person's skull. Someone with a wide face has broad cheekbones, for example, while a bent, beak-like nose corresponds with a similarly shaped nasal bridge, the bone above the nasal hole. The first step in creating a facial reconstruction is to make an exact replica of the skull to eliminate any risk of damaging the original. Replicas can be made in several ways. For example, the skull of the teenage girl from Harley Knoll was reproduced with a computerized tomography scan, or CT scan. This type of scan is used in the medical field to create images of tumors and other internal medical conditions. Instead of making a single image, as a regular X-ray machine would, a CT scanner makes many digital images called slices, which form a complete image when combined. Each slice contains hundreds of digital measurements. A computer translates these measurements into points that can be plotted on a three-dimensional or 3D grid. When all the points are plotted, a 3D image of the skull can be displayed on a computer's monitor. The image created by a CT scan is digital. It only exists within the computer. For the artist to create facial reconstruction, the image must be translated into a solid object. A technician transfers the digital data to sophisticated machinery that uses computer-guided precision tools to manufacture a replica skull. The result accurately reflects the surface features of the original skull, including the tiniest cracks, depressions, and raised areas. Joanna Hughes, the forensic artist who created a clay reconstruction of HK7's face, began her work by placing an artificial eye in each of the replica skull's eye sockets. Noting HK7's African ancestry, Hughes selected brown eyes. Next, she consulted a chart created by anthropologists based on known measurements of facial tissue in the underlying muscles. Using this data as a guide, Hughes glued markers to the replica to represent the thickness of the living tissue and muscles a person of HK7's age, size, and ancestry would have most likely possessed. I use about 15 markers per skull. The markers are actually erasers. They're placed on specific points on the skull, explained Hughes. Based on the size and location of the markers, Hughes added oil-based clay to the replica to form tissue and features. Oil-based clay doesn't dry. It remains soft to the touch so the artist can rework the features as needed. The hardest features to do are the ears and the eyelids, Hughes noted. Ears are very complex because there are lots of nooks and crannies that are hard to sculpt, and eyelids are very small and thin. Owsley and Brulhide worked closely with Hughes as she developed the reconstruction. They made suggestions and corrections based on their analyses of the skull shape and features. Once her work was complete, the soft clay reconstruction was shipped to Studio EIS, a sculpture and design studio whose sculptors specialize in creating historically accurate sculptures. We continue the process from where the forensic artists left off, using exactly what they've given us but in a different permanent material, explained Ivan Schwartz, the studio's founder and director. The sculptors began by creating a plaster mold of Hughes clay sculpture. The wet plaster is applied directly to the oil-based clay and allowed to solidify, explained Schwartz. Because oil-based clay repels the water in plaster, the hardened plaster didn't stick to the clay. The resulting plaster mold was pulled off the sculpture and filled with water-based clay. Studio EIS sculptors then removed this clay cast from the mold and began to finalize the details of the reconstruction. The sculptors added precise features to give the reconstruction the look of a living person. By adding clay in one area and removing it from another, by looking at a living teenage girl whose bone structure resembled that of HK7, by noting the small details of individual faces, The curve of the tip of an ear or the waist skin lies over a cheek or jaw. And by keeping in mind the structural reflections Hughes had created, the sculptors meticulously added lifelike characteristics around the girl's eyes, mouth, and chin. The use of clay allowed the sculptors to continually refine the details until Owsley and Brewelhide gave their approval to create the final permanent reconstruction. The sculptors then created one more mold by applying a flexible rubbery material called silicone to the sculpture, allowing it to dry and peeling off the clay. The silicone mold was filled with plaster. After this plaster cast dried, an artist painted it to complete the facial reconstruction. The result is a lasting, durable sculpture worthy of a museum display. It's also the first such reconstruction of an American colonist of African ancestry. The creation of facial reconstruction perfectly illustrates how two seemingly different disciplines, science and art, can complement each other. The combination of Owsley and Brewelhide's scientific analysis and interpretation of a skull's bony features with the artistic talents of sculptors who specialize in forensic work gives us a rare opportunity. Despite the passage of centuries, we can come face to face with people who lived long ago, further strengthening the skeletal story that has already established a connection between us.